going to be reading you a story today. But first of all, I'd like to tell you a little bit about myself. I'm a dental hygienist, and I clean people's teeth, and I make sure that their gums are nice and healthy. So I hope you guys are all brushing and flossing very well. I also have 3 children. They're 17, 15, and 10. And this was one of their favorite stories that I would read to them when they were growing up. So I hope you guys really like it. It's a fun book about a little girl who is afraid of what her friends would think of her if they really knew that she liked lima beans. And something wacky and weird happens to her when she just doesn't embrace who she is. So I hope you guys like the story. It's called A Bad Case of the Stripes by David Shannon. Camilla Cream loved lima beans, but she never ate them. All of her friends hated lima beans, and she wanted to fit in. Camilla was always worried about what other people thought of her. Today, she was fretting even more than usual. It was the first day of school, and she couldn't find what to wear. There were so many people to impress. She tried on 42 outfits. 42, can you imagine? That's a lot of clothes. But none of them seemed to fit quite right. She put on a pretty red dress and looked in the mirror. Then she screamed. Why did she scream? Her mother ran into the room and she screamed too. "Oh my heavens," she cried. "You're completely covered with stripes." This was certainly true. Camilla was striped from head to toe. She looked like a rainbow. Mrs. Cream felt Camilla's forehead. "Do you feel all right?" "I feel fine," Camilla answered. "But just look at me." "You get back into bed this instant," her mother ordered. "You're not going to school today." Camilla was relieved. She didn't want to miss the first day of school, but she was afraid of what other kids would say. And she had no idea what to wear with those crazy stripes. That afternoon, Dr. Bumble came to examine Camilla. "Most extraordinary," he exclaimed. "I've never seen anything like it." "Are you having any coughing, sneezing, runny nose, aches, pains, chills, hot flashes, dizziness, drowsiness, shortness of breath, or uncontrollable twitching?" "No," Camilla told him. "I feel fine." "Well then," Dr. Bumble said, turning to Mrs. Cream, "I don't see any reason why she shouldn't go to school tomorrow. Here's some ointment that should help clear up those stripes in a few days. If it doesn't, you know where to find me." And he walked out the door. The next day was a disaster. Everyone at school laughed at Camilla. They called her Camilla Crayon and Night of the Living Lollipop. She tried her best to act as if everything were normal, but when the class said the Pledge of Allegiance, her stripes turned into red, white, and blue with stars all over. The other kids thought this was great. One yelled out, "Let's see some purple polka dots." Sure enough, Camilla turned all purple polka dotty. Someone else shouted, "Checkerboard," and a pattern of squares appeared all over her skin. Soon everyone was calling out different shapes and colors, and poor Camilla was changing faster than you can change channels on a TV. You see all the different patterns on Camilla's skin. That night, Mr. Harms, the school principal, called. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Cream," he said. "I'm going to have to ask you to keep Camilla home from school. She's just too much of a distraction. And I've been getting calls from other parents. They're afraid those stripes might be contagious." Camilla was so embarrassed. She couldn't believe that 2 days ago everyone liked her. Now nobody wanted to be in the same room with her. Her father tried to make her feel better. "Is there anything I can get you, sweetheart?" he asked. "No, thank you," sighed Camilla. What she really wanted was a nice plate of lima beans. But she had been laughed at enough for only one day. "Well, yes, I see," Dr. Bumble mumbled when Mr. Cream phoned the next day. "I think I'd better bring in the specialist. We'll be right over." About an hour later, Dr. Bumble arrived with 4 people in long white coats. He introduced them to the Creams. "This is Dr. Grop, Dr. Sponge, Dr. Cricket, and Dr. Young." Then the specialists went to work on Camilla as fast as they could. They squeezed and jabbed and tapped and tested. It was very uncomfortable. "Well, it's not the mumps," concluded Dr. Grop. "Or the measles," said Dr. Sponge. "Definitely not the chicken pox," put in Dr. Cricket. "Or sunburn," said Dr. Young. "Try these," said the specialist, and they each handed her a bottle of vitamins filled with different colored pills. "Take one of each before bed," said Dr. Grop. Then they fled out the front door, followed by Dr. Bumble. That night, Camilla took her vitamins. It was awful. When she woke up the next morning, she did feel different, but when she got dressed, her clothes didn't fit right. She looked into the mirror, and there, staring back at her, was a giant multicolored vitamin with her face on it. Dr. Bumble rushed over as soon as Mrs. Cream called, but this time, instead of the specialists, he brought the experts. Do you think they're going to be able to fix Camilla? What do you think is wrong with her? Dr. Gord and Mr. Mellon were the finest scientific minds in the land. Once again, Camilla was poked and prodded, looked at, and listened to. The experts wrote down lots of numbers. Then they huddled together and whispered. Dr. Gord finally spoke. "It might be a virus," he announced with authority. Suddenly, fuzzy little virus balls appeared all over Camilla. "Or possibly some form of bacteria," said Mr. Mellon. And out popped squiggly little bacteria tails. "Or it could be a fungus," added Dr. Gord. Instantly, Camilla was covered with different colored fungus blotches. The experts looked at Camilla, then they looked at each other. "We need to go over these numbers again back at the lab," Dr. Gord explained. "We'll call you when we know something." But the experts didn't have a clue, much less a cure. By now, the TV news had found out about Camilla. Reporters from every channel were outside her house, telling the story of the bizarre case of the incredible changing kid. Soon, a huge crowd was camped out on the front lawn. She's kind of becoming a bit of a celebrity, isn't she? It's a lot of attention for one little girl. The Creams were swamped with all kinds of remedies from psychologists, allergists, herbalists, nutritionists, psychics, an old medicine man, a guru, and even a veterinarian. Each so-called cure only added to poor Camilla's strange appearance until it was hard to even recognize her. She sprouted roots and berries and crystals and feathers and a long furry tail, but nothing worked. One day, a woman who called herself an environmental therapist claimed she could cure Camilla. "Close your eyes," she said. "Breathe deeply and become one with your room." "I wish you hadn't said that," Camilla groaned, and slowly she started to melt into the walls of her room. Her bed became her mouth, her nose was her dresser, and the two paintings became her eyes. The therapist screamed and ran from the house. "What are we going to do?" cried Mrs. Cream. "It just keeps getting worse and worse." She began to sob. Poor Camilla. At that moment, Mrs. Cream heard a quiet little knock at the front door. She opened it, and there stood an old woman who was just as plump and sweet as a strawberry. "Excuse me," she said brightly, "but I think I can help." What do you think she's gonna do? She went into Camilla's room and looked around. "My goodness," she said with a shake of her head. "What we have here is a bad case of the stripes. One of the worst I've ever seen." She pulled out a container of small green beans from her bag. "What do you think those are?" "Here," she said. "These might do the trick." "Are those magic beans?" asked Mrs. Cream. "Oh my, no," replied the kind old woman. "There is no such thing as magic beans. These are just plain old lima beans. I'll bet you'd like some." "Wouldn't you?" she asked Camilla. Camilla wanted a big heaping plateful of lima beans more than just about anything in the world, but she still was afraid to admit it. "Yuck," she said. "No one likes lima beans. Especially me." "Oh dear," said the old woman sadly. "I guess I was wrong about you." She put the beans back in her bag and started towards the door. Camilla watched the old woman walk away. Those beans would taste so good. And being laughed at for eating them was nothing compared to what she'd been going through. She finally couldn't stand it. "Wait!" she cried. "The truth is, I really love lima beans." "I thought so," said the old woman with a smile. She took a handful of beans and popped them into Camilla's mouth. "Mmm," said Camilla. Suddenly, the branches, feathers, and squiggly tails began to disappear. Then the whole room swirled around. When it stopped, there stood Camilla, and everything was back to normal. "I'm cured," she shouted. "Yes," said the old woman. "I knew the real you was in there somewhere." She patted Camilla on the head, then went outside and vanished into the crowd. Afterward, Camilla wasn't quite the same. Some of the kids at school said she was weird, but she didn't care a bit. She ate all the lima beans she wanted, and she never had even a touch of the case of the stripes again. So I hope you like the book, and I hope you always eat your favorite foods and that you're never afraid to be yourself. Thanks for letting me read to you. Have a great day.